With local government elections being constitutionally due by the end of February, Jamaicans are eagerly awaiting their opportunity to exercise their constitutional right. The public is waiting, we're anxious, and the parties are no different. They're actually waiting to see whether or not they should go ahead with even the general elections. How soon? One is awaiting a public mandate. For this and more, we look forward to this discussion with Mr. Dan Anderson, Executive Chairman of Market Research Services Limited and former Vice President of the Jamaica Olympic Association. I'm Kwame Thomas, and this is The Conversation. Welcome to The Conversation. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm good. As you're right to say, people are anxiously awaiting the announcement, which we gather may come today. It can't come much later than today if we're to honor the obligation to hold elections by the end of February.
Oh, so if it doesn't come within the next 3 to 5 days, then what happened? What next?
I'm sure there would be questions of a breach of promise, because I think everybody expects that it will be held before the end of February. This is probably the last opportunity to do it without, serious consequences or public fallout.
What are the implications, though, of having that?
I think there would be a lot of dissatisfaction, not only on one side, but on both sides. The general public, I think, wants to get this election out of the way. And I'd be surprised if it's not called in the next couple of days. I really would be surprised because I think there's a commitment to call it. But I think if it isn't, which I don't think will happen, if it isn't, then I think there would be a fair amount of public fallout for the government if that actually is the course of action that is taken.
So the last one that we had was 2020.
That was the last general election,
okay.
But the last local election was in 2016.
2016,
right,
and
so
we have had
years.
1, 2, 3 that we have skipped.
That's correct. I don't think anybody wants to contemplate that, quite frankly.
So, well, that brings a question, though, what is the primary purpose of the local government election? Is it necessary to still have it seen that we have skipped it so many times?
Well, I mean, you could argue that if you have missed a couple of them, well, maybe you can do without it. But the reality is that the councillors who are being elected for the local government during the local government election are expected to be the ones that are closest to what's happening in the divisions within the constituencies and therefore would know best what the constituents need. So from that perspective, I think it's an important election. We have traditionally had local government elections. And I believe that the councillors who form, who are elected to the divisions are the ones who would be best in a position to identify what are the needs of the constituencies over and above the sort of central kind of observation and central directive. But I think the local councillors are the ones who would be in a better position to know what needs are to be fulfilled in the respective divisions which comprise different constituencies.
So you're saying that outside of just tradition, there is actually some level of relevance continued relevance, especially in light of the fact that we're embarking on constitutional reform and all of that. You're saying that it might still be relevant or important to keep something as the local government elections?
I think so. The general public has generally treated the local government elections as less important than the general. You can tell from the kind of voter turnout in local government elections, which tend, by the way, to be following the downward path in terms of turnout. And the fact is that local government elections don't attract the same numbers of persons as the general. And it's because the general voter turnout has been lower, and it's because people are not considering it to be as important as. Now, you may ask the question, why? And I think there studies need to be done as to establish really why do people treat it as a second cousin to national elections.
But it seems to be a little bit more than, and that it might be from one end. I'm thinking about the messaging, because as a member of the public, I'm of the opinion that because not much importance is stressed on this from the perspective of the government and members of the opposition, then why do I need to exercise that much importance to it as well?
I don't think it's a question that the government doesn't play doesn't place importance
Well,
on
the
it.
messaging looks questionable
It
because
does.
1, 2, 3.
The optics are clear,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, if you miss 3 local government elections, well, can you miss a 4th and 5th and then eventually not have it? I think that the optics are kind of very important to note. But especially in this particular situation where we find ourselves now looking down the barrel of the 2025 election, which is a year plus away from here, the local government election assumes a significant degree of importance. Why?
So you're going to tell me that most likely one party will use it to test to see whether or not the momentum is still there.
Both parties will use it to test where they are.
And the other one will see whether or not they need to, what kind of changes they need to make to,
Yeah.
to fine-tune the machinery.
This
What else?
particular local government election is going to be a pivotal one, I believe, because both parties are claiming to be
Neck and neck,
attracting
all right.
the political polls say that the elections are likely to be very close, the next general elections, whenever they're called. My polls, for example, talk in terms of a gap which is within the margin of error or just on the cusp of the margin of error. And therefore, both parties are looking at it very seriously.
It's in favor of who?
At the moment, the People's National Party. But I want to stress the point that between 2016 and 2020, end of 2022, we did about 7 national polls for the TVJ group. I don't mind mentioning it on your station because they were the sponsors of those. And it's important to mention it wasn't for any political party. It was for an independent entity. And in none of those 7 national polls that we did was the People's National Party anywhere near with an opportunity to win any election that was called after the 2016 election, right? But since the beginning of 2023, we have done about 3 or 4 national polls, and those have had the PNP either neck and neck or marginally ahead. So the question on the big issue really is, and there has been talk. There's no substantiation of this. There has been talk that the government has been reluctant to call the local government election because they're not sure where they are. The People's National Party are probably anxious. I don't know how prepared they are, but they're probably anxious to see the local government elections called because of the polls that have suggested that they are ahead. So both are very keyed up in terms of this particular election. And I dare say that depending on how the elections go, the local government elections go when they're held this month, we could see an early election.
Wow.
Early general election.
So would your argument be that it's not a case whereby the PNP has gotten better, but it's more a case whereby the JLP has either stayed where it is or they have gotten worse, based on your stats?
Let me give you some stats, and I leave you all to determine whether that is an accurate assessment or not. Because between 2011 election and 2020 election, when you look at the numbers of persons who voted for the PNP between those 2 years, in 2011, fast forward to 2020, the number of persons voted for the PNP during that time was 170,000 people less in 2020. Now there's a fall off in voter turnout and voter support for the PNP to the tune of 170,000 persons, roughly. The fall off for the JLP in that time was 4,000 persons. So in essence, what I'm saying is that when you look at the numbers who have voted for the Jamaica Labour Party over that period, there's hardly any change. And the huge difference really has been the fall off in the numbers of persons who voted for the PNP over the period. I'll leave those stats and you can read it how you want.
Well, based on what I'm hearing, it would give, most of us have always made the assumption that the People's National Party has traditionally maintained a stronger support base than the Jamaica Labour Party. And the fact that 170,000 have decided not to vote, then it's telling they are disgruntled with the leadership. And we have heard those things
Well, I
in the
wouldn't go
news.
as far as saying disgruntled with the leadership. They're disgruntled. Now, there are a number of factors.
disgruntled and there are
Leadership may be one of them. We don't know.
Well, we have heard.
Yeah.
Leadership is definitely among, or most definitely might be among the whole cadre of things that have caused them to become disgruntled. And then when you look at the Jamaica Labour Party now, you find that they have traditionally had a small voter base. So it's just a case where most of those persons have gone out to vote. Whereas for the PNP, most of those persons have refrained from voting.
So in other words, the difference between the 2011 election, when the People's National Party won 42 of the 63, and the 2020 election, when the JLP won 49 of the 63, it's stark. And the real reason is because there was a significant fallout in terms of voter support for the People's National Party, and not so much a significant gain for the Jamaica Labour Party. But it's the numbers, 42 to 14, and 21 to 49. That's a huge difference, and it talks in terms of those numbers that left the ranks of the People's National Party.
Yes, and so be that as it may, I understand the whole issue of voter turnout and whatnot, but it seems as though over the years, it's just the same amount of persons nominally that have been going out to vote. So you have more persons being added to the voter pool, but fewer of those persons are actually going out to exercise their franchise.
There's again another stark piece of information that I presented to the electoral office. Recently, I was invited to make a presentation at their retreat. When you look at the pattern of voter turnout vis-a-vis numbers of persons registered to vote, you can see from about 1997 thereabout, a huge widening of the gap between registration and voter turnout. Up to, I plotted this from between 1960 to thereabout, up to about 1998, and there was quite a narrow gap between registered voters and those who turned out, very narrow gap. And then from about 1990, you can see that explosion because we had a significant increase in voter registration.
Yes.
And a concomitant flattening of those who actually voted, turned out to vote. Now, it is felt, rightly I believe, and there's been some information to corroborate that a lot of people are getting the national ID cards, not necessarily to vote, but it's a good ID for you to present at various places.
Let me hold hold that thought for now. We go to our first break. You are watching The Conversation, where I'm speaking with veteran pollster, Mr. Don Anderson. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation, where I'm speaking with the Executive Chairman of Market Research Services Limited, Mr. Don Anderson. So just before the break, we started looking at why, some of the reasons behind persons, that huge swath of persons going to get their voter registration. But the fall off in terms of the amount of persons who are actually voting. Now, many persons might argue that it's a good idea to have. What are some of the, or what might be some of the other reasons that might cause persons to have this card, but they are not actually voting?
Well, we've been tracking this for a number of years because we've been concerned about voter apathy. Some people don't like to call it voter apathy, but it is voter apathy. There's a significant disconnect between persons coming on stream and persons' desire to vote because there's a mistrust of politicians. There's been a very high degree of disenchantment because people don't believe they're benefiting to any extent from being involved in politics. A lot of people don't think that their vote is going to make a difference one way or another, and that number is growing. When you think in terms of, for example, the young persons, we did a study 10 years ago looking at the 15 to 17-year-olds that can't vote yet, right? But because we were concerned about the very low incidence of voter turnout amongst the young people 18 to 24, we did a study amongst the 15 to 17-year-olds. Half of them didn't know how to spell the word politics. The other half didn't have any desire to learn how to spell the word politics. So people were turned off from the get-go. They just didn't believe that politics was something that they should be interested in. They had no real reason to be. And we saw that as a kind of developing indicator that over the next 10 years, you were going to have a relatively low turnout of young persons 18 to 24. And that's basically what's happening. The age category that is least represented in polling, in voting, is the 18 to 24.
So that begs a whole heap of questions, though, because I remember looking in one of the local papers. It was December, and the polls indicated that there is supposed to be a 38% voter turnout for the next election. That was what they were saying. And
who was saying that, by the way? You have to be careful.
Well, I think it was just an in-house. Okay. It might have been an in-house poll. Okay. But when you look at that,
I expect it to be a little higher.
Yeah, when you look at that, though, and I'm seeing where from the last poll that was conducted, it was 48.37, I think, percent that actually went to vote, and then that's coming down. That's going down significantly. What can we even do? Because if we say, okay, let us implement mandatory voting, then it's not necessarily a true democracy. But what else can we do?
Well, first of all, let me give you the numbers. In the 2020 election, the voter turnout was 37.8%. But you're right, it's coming down from in the 40s. And that trend has been there for maybe the last 4 or 5 elections, where fewer and fewer people are turning out to vote. We had voter turnout of up to 80-odd%. Yeah, in the 1980s, thereabout, voter turnout was in excess of 80%.
That's almost 2 generations ago.
I know,
okay.
But it's been a gradual, you have to take it from the time series is what's important, you know, so the longer trend you can look at. So there was our peak. But from then, we have had a consistent decline in number of persons who are turning out to vote. So in the 2020 election, we had 37.8% who turned out to vote. And that was a significant fall off from the previous election in 2016, right? Now, you ask the question, what can be done? First of all, you have to know why they're not turning out to vote. And there's, as I indicated, a significant disconnect, a disaffection. People just don't believe that the political process is doing them sufficient justice and good. And they just don't want to go to vote because they don't think it's going to make a difference. So these are the factors. And they believe that politics is corrupt. They believe that politicians are corrupt. And they don't believe that politicians mean them any good. So there are significant negatives that they are identifying which are preventing them from going out to vote.
So
now, how do you turn that around?
Go on.
Well, again, I think it calls for a new culture. Today, unfortunately, we're going to be probably looking at some corruption issues.
Definitely.
There's a greater and greater belief that politics has become quite corrupt, and therefore the country has become quite corrupt.
Is it that the politics has become quite corrupt, or is it that we have always seen politics as being corrupt and now the country is getting or is being perceived as being more corrupt?
I think it's a combination of factors. But for sure, people are looking at the whole political environment and not liking what they're seeing, either from the politicians themselves or the political environment. They just don't think it's a healthy one. And so people are disconnecting. And probably most importantly, they don't see themselves benefiting from voting. I talk to a lot of young people.
Is it that we're talking about instant gratification where I vote no and I get something, so transactionally speaking, there is not much benefit, or is it that you're talking about something long-term where I don't see what politicians are doing for me?
More long-term, the transactional behavior comes on the day of election, all right?
Okay.
The people are either paid to go to vote or paid to stay away from voting or whatever. you know, and are being rewarded handsomely. People not going to admit it. We have done some polls trying to establish, well, what's the incidence of people being induced to either go or not to go. We can't establish that reliably, so we won't talk in terms of that. But there is that knowledge that people are being either incentivized or discouraged from going out to voting by various means and offered various incentives to do so. But that's the transactional behavior on the day of the election. We believe the negatives are more long-term. People just don't see a good enough reason to go out to vote because in the final analysis, boy, I voted last time or the time before that and I don't see no benefit, you know? And they're now saying, I really don't think I'm going to benefit any at all. I don't trust the politicians. They're all for themselves. We only see them when it's election time. These are some of the reasons that they volunteer as to why they don't go to vote.
What might be some of those benefits that persons are envisioning and they're not seeing?
Some is personal, you know. I mean, we talk to people and they're not going to go to vote because they don't benefit. They don't get no benefit personally. But I think generally they're talking about the things that would make an improvement in their own constituency, in their own division, in their own country. They're not seeing those benefits. They believe that the politicians are in fact taking much of the benefits for themselves.
So roads, water, inflation.
Water, yeah, absolutely, utilities, etc. You know, health facilities, community centers come up quite a lot. So there's that disconnect because people don't think that they're going to be benefiting to the extent that they would like to benefit. And it's personal, but personal benefit is really low down on the totem pole. It's really in terms of what is being done for the betterment of their own lives.
What do you think, though, that would be a fair assessment in terms of, because we're looking at the pace at which Jamaica is developing. So do you think that those demands or those expectations are helping us to form a fair assessment of their needs and what they think that they're not getting?
I think there's enough information. I certainly believe there's enough information to inform the politicians as to where the focus ought to be in terms of development. There's no question about it, even at a local level, whether it's roads, water, you know, different housing, health facilities, community centers. There's enough information that directs them and informs them as to where the emphasis should be. Why there's not greater implementation, I don't really know. We again would need to have some empirical data to speak authoritatively about it. But I think that there's a considerable turnoff because people just don't think they're benefiting to the extent that they would like to benefit or feel they should benefit. And there is this increasing level of disaffection, which is what is being demonstrated. Now, people might say, well, 2020 was COVID year, you know. We haven't found any information that suggests that COVID played a major part in keeping people away from the polls.
So let me try and merge this now with the whole local government elections.
Yeah.
Do you think that it would be better or do you think rather that the councillors and so on, they should be given a little bit more autonomy? Because seeing that you had stated earlier that they are closer to the ground, and in light of all that you have just said, would it be better off if they had more autonomy and so to bring forward the relevance of their own thing?
I think autonomy is not necessarily what they need, more resources than anything else. A lot of councillors claim that, you know, well, they aren't really getting the kind of resources that they need to be able to make a difference. So autonomy is one thing, but you'd have to have the resources to be able to exercise autonomy.
So then the possibility exists that they're actually doing enough given what they have. So autonomy is not an issue, but it's literally just more resources.
And you know what's key is that the councillors being closer to the constituents ought to know best what is needed in a particular division. But then, as has been articulated to us, quite often there is a dissonance between, you know, it depends on who controls the councils and who controls the government. Because there have been concerns that when the two are different, the resources don't flow to the ones that are not in government office. There's that challenge, but can it be proven? You know, it would require some work. But there's that concept, there's that belief that when the government is held by one of the two parties and the councils are controlled by the other party, that there is not adequate enough distribution or equitable enough distribution of the resources.
Well,
This is a thought.
So,
This is a
so
concept.
victimization becomes an issue then?
Um,
Or that's the
It's a
argument?
strong word.
That's the argument.
That's the argument. It's a strong word.
So, all right, so let's get that out the issue now, out of the window. What we're looking at now, the whole idea of, so yes, by the end of this month, local government elections constitutionally due. What are some of the implications of it being so close? Because also we understand that 2025, we should be having the next general election. Are there any implications that we need to consider with them being so close behind each other?
Well, they generally are close behind each other. You know, in 2020, 2016, for example, we had a general election earlier and we had the local government shortly thereafterwards. Now, so it's all a part of strategy. So political strategy is key in all of this. There is a strongly held view, and I hold that view too myself, that if the JLP does well in the local government election, you could anticipate general elections shortly thereafter.
And if
not, they will want to ensure that they build the forces together to be able to do a better job in the general.
So you're saying that the possibility exists that if the People's National Party comes out of the local government election victoriously, then you might be a delay. There might be a slight delay in when the announcement is made for the general elections, while if the opposite occurs...
No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the scenarios. There are a couple of scenarios. The PNP could do very well and win the local government election, meaning, hold most of the councils. They could do okay, and it's pretty even stuff, as the polls are indicating now. But I want to make the point, as a political pollster, polls don't win elections. Elections are won on the election day. It's the party that has the best machinery, has communicated the best message, who has done the best work getting the people out. That's the party that's going to win the election. Okay. So the other scenario is that JLP doesn't do well, or they do very well in the local government election. If they do very well in the local government election, it will be an indicator to them. We're in a good position. Maybe we shouldn't delay
for too long,
because we have a year plus. Who knows what could happen in a year plus, So I believe, again, just to state that if the JLP does well in the local government elections, I think you could anticipate a fairly short period between now and the general election, which would give them another 5 years in office, rather than waiting for maybe the People's National Party to really get themselves together and do better in the general.
All right, so let me put you on the spot now, Mr. Anderson. What if Mark Golden loses the local government election? What if the People's National Party lose? Would it affect Mark Golden's leadership, or might it affect his leadership?
I think there would be questions, but again, I like to talk from the basis of empirical data. And what the empirical data that I have suggests is that there's a lessening of a focus on the leaders of the respective parties now than there was, say, during Portia Simpson Miller or P.J. Patterson time. Okay? In other words, we're less leader-centric now and more issues-focused, so that the leader plays an important role, but unlike when
leader-centric.
Yeah, unlike when Portia was in office, Portia's popularity rating was in the 70s and 60s, and when P.J. Patterson was in office, he was a very popular leader in his own way, different way. But they both had the kind of charisma to drag people along with them, right? I think in both Andrew Holness's position and Mark Golden's position, we have seen over the last 2 years a gradual falling of the importance, narrowing of the importance, lessening of the importance of the leader in driving support for the respective parties. That's what I am saying.
Oh, so you're pretty much...
So a loss would impact anytime a leader loses, whether in sports or what, or when a team loses, you take a look at the leader. But I don't think it would necessarily be a devastating situation where they would try to call for a new leader. Because I believe they right now understand that any leader contest is not going to be to the interest of the party.
Okay, all right. So with that, we take our second break. You're watching The Conversation. I'm Kwame Thomas. We'll be right back.
When you plan to hear this.
Welcome back to The Conversation. Welcome back to The Conversation. We are now about to shift gears. We're going to be looking at the state of the country's, well, the country's state of corruption, or the corruption in the country. And for that, we're still going to be speaking with the veteran pollster, Executive Chairman of Market Research Services Limited, Mr. Don Anderson. So, a few days ago, you were in a meeting with the NIA, and a number of things came to the fore. One of the things that stuck out to me was the fact that we are now 69 in terms of position, in terms of corruption index worldwide, and then in terms of a score, we're at 44. We're still below 50, so that's, in my view, it's still horrible. But we are still at 69, and that's for a few years now. What can you say about that?
Well, I think it's important to just explain that a little bit more for the general public. If you look at it just so, it probably is a little bit, you probably aren't sure what is being said, so let me see if I can clarify it. The lower the score, the more corrupt the country.
Definitely.
First thing to really, the lower the score, the more corrupt the country.
Now we're talking about the 44 that we have
44.
Here.
Okay. Right. That score will take you somewhere along the ranking in terms of the 100 and odd countries that contribute to the Transparency International.
There's about how many countries for the record? About 180?
100 and thereabout, 170, 180. All right. So, at a score of 44, I should make another point before that. When you're 50 and lower, meaning 50 going to 0, then you're more corrupt. So the closer you are to 0, the more corrupt you are. Right? Mm-hmm. No. A score of 44 we've been consistently in that range over the last couple of years. Which means, it means that our corruption perception
has not changed.
Has been no better over the last couple of years. We're considered to be below 50 in the range of countries where corruption is high. When you get to 80 and 90 and 100 and so on, then it means that you are less corrupt. But 50 and below means that you are in the more corrupt. And that's a kind of, 50 is a kind of line that is drawn. 50 and lower means that you are very corrupt. You're considered to be very corrupt.
All right, and then in terms of the position now, we're 69. What does that mean?
It means that there are 68 countries ahead of us in terms of being more corrupt than we are.
So the lower that number, the better corrupt we are.
No. The ranking
yes.
is a measure of how many countries are ahead of us. At 69, that score of 44 places us 69th in terms of countries.
So we're better than 68 countries. That's what you're saying. Or we're less corrupt than 68 countries.
Yes.
No.
Yes. Well, yeah.
So for the record though, what are the implications? Are there any implications for that? And does that speak to whether or not we are able to sufficiently or efficiently monitor the processes or the systems that we have? What does it mean? We're trying to understand it.
Well, it means that there are a number of factors, and I think in that presentation, the head of NIA articulated some of the things that contribute to that. You know, and some of them we know, the failure to disclose, the lack of transparency in terms of how we handle government funding and that type of thing. These are issues that impact us. And I think what it says is that when you're looking at it from the outside, it's not a good optic for you to be perceived to be amongst the more corrupt countries in the world, or what that means in terms of funding and aid and so on. I can't measure that. I don't know. All right, but it does say that we have a lot of work to do in terms of cleaning up the perception that is currently held of us internationally by Transparency International, which measures and which is unacceptable. It's a reputable organization that looks at corruption indices around the world, nearly all the countries in the world. And when we are perceived to be amongst the more corrupt countries, it does not send the right message.
So do you think, for example, I can think of a number of scandals, but you think the illicit six, for example, and a few other things or statements that have been made in Parliament by our parliamentarians, you think those things might have added to the perception index?
I have no doubt. I can't say what weight each of them carries. I mean, to what extent these are drivers of the corruption numbers that we have. But they must play a role. They must play a part in all of that. And I believe that these are things that, are taken into consideration or are presented as evidence of the fact that we are perceived to be one of the more corrupt countries in the world.
But based on that, then, I'm also led to believe that it might just be an issue of how well we communicate. So it's not that we are corrupt per se, but it's just that we are poor at communicating. Could that be it also?
No. And let me draw upon some other experiences that I made reference to in the presentation that we did a couple of studies. The study that we did for the National Integrity Agency, incidentally, is one of about 7 that we have done over the last 10 years. So there's a pretty consistent trend of information that we've picked up. Around about 2018, I believe, we conducted a similar study for the National Integrity Action. It was almost the same time we were doing a study for the Ministry of National Security. It was about the same time we were doing a study for Transparency International, all right? And we had to make 3 separate presentations within the space of about a week. Good for us, right? One of the central things that came out of all those 3 studies pointed in the same direction. This was amongst the general public. A significant percentage of the Jamaican people, in excess of 70%, said that as far as they are concerned, corruption has become a way of life in Jamaica. And that's a heavy statement.
So corruption is now endemic.
Endemic.
Now,
that was 5 years ago.
That was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Have your studies changed in terms of persons and the statements that they have made? Has that changed any at all?
We haven't done similar studies all the way through in terms of that particular sort of index that we picked up then. But in general, based on studies we have done for the NIA in 2019, 2021, and 2023, based on information that we have for more business and consumer studies that market research handles and has handled for the last 22 years consistently, there is every indication that there is a greater and greater acceptance of the fact that Jamaica is amongst the more corrupt countries.
Are there any, I know generally persons have had issues with the constabulary force. They might have stated that they're corrupt. And we generally love to point fingers at politicians because it's easy. Is it a case, is that still the case where we are pointing at the politicians, the members of the JCF and all of those other organizations? Are there any other that you could add to that list, or are those still on the list?
They are still right on top of the list. Actually, the politicians and the police are considered. When we looked at the most recent data, when we asked people their perception, I mean, they don't know for fact, but the perception they have is that the politicians and the police are amongst the more corrupt in the society. But they also talk in terms of persons in, senior public sector workers and private sector people and so on. But the top of the list are the politicians and the police. They're perceived to be amongst the more corrupt in the society. This is a perception that the public has. I want to make it clear that it's coming out of studies that we have done amongst the general public. This is a perception that they have.
So, Sir Andy, let me call it that for now. If corruption is endemic, how do we go about cleaning that up? How can we even address or begin to address that? How do we clean it up? How can we?
I think, first of all, there has to be a will. There has to be a recognition that this is the reality, first of all. Because if you go about telling yourself, well, that's not so, then you're not going to do anything about it. I think, so first of all, there has to be an acceptance that the data that is being bandied about regularly, not only by Market Research Services Limited, which collect the data from people, reliable sample, but Transparency International, which has no axe to grind anywhere along the line, nor does Market Research, that, we have a challenge. Unless you accept that, then there won't be the will to do anything about it. All right?
So is it that we're looking at political will, the will of the general populace, or a combination of both, or what exactly are we
I think the effort
about?
has to be a combined effort, but it has to be driven by the authorities who are in a position to impact the level of criminality and the level of corruption. Now, let me take a leaf out of the book of the Business and Consumer study that we did recently. It's a study that we've been doing for 22 years, from 2001 until now, continuously in business establishments and in homes of people, all right, general public. When we look at how they feel about the economy, how they feel about their profitability and so on, and we ask them, well, what is the largest single deterrent to doing better as a country? For both the consumers and for the business sector, crime and corruption are big issues. Crime in particular, of which corruption is a huge component of it. All right?
All right,
They're saying this is the largest single negative driving greater acceptance of us as a country.
All right, let me hold that point.
Yeah.
We're going to go to our final break with Mr. Dan Anderson, Executive Chairman of the Market Research Services Limited. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the conversation. So just before we went on the break, you started looking at the fact that most Jamaicans had an issue with crime. What I want to know, and we're talking about consumers and business people.
Yeah.
What kind, did they go as far as to mention the kind of crimes, or they were just saying broadly crime, and what else have they mentioned?
Sorry, they were talking broadly about crime. So there was no effort to break that down into murders versus burglaries versus whatever, assault. It was crime, both consumers and businesses. And we're talking about the business and consumer study that we do and have done for the last 20 odd years. One of the things that we pulled out of the recent study for the National Integrity Agency is, and we're going to segue into it. What do you think are the things that we should do to try to impact this level of crime and corruption and bring it down? And we asked them the question, a very open-ended, spontaneous response question. And we trapped a range of answers from the general public. But very much like what we get out of the business and consumer study, when we ask people, how do you think we should deal with this whole monster of crime and corruption? Job availability, addressing issues to do with the youth are very important. So what did we get out of the particular study on the NIA? 14% felt more social intervention, jobs, and parenting skills. Largest single spontaneous response. We didn't prompt anybody, we just got the verbatim and we used
social intervention, jobs, and parenting skills.
Right.
Okay.
12% said, I want to make it very clear, this is a spontaneous response of the nearly 1,000 people that we interviewed. Fire all or most of the politicians, 12%. right? We do have nothing to do with these answers. These are the answers that we trap from people who.
So before you get a little further into
Yeah.
that study, I remember when the public sector compensation review was being conducted, and when the politicians were speaking about the increase that they would have gotten, it was stated that this would attract the best and the brightest minds. But based on what we have been saying since the start of this program, it doesn't seem as though that has any bearing, the amount of money that you will pay, you know. So we're looking at the fact that the question is, who are the ones that vote in the politicians? Because they're saying that to fire all the politicians, that's one. So who vote the politicians in that? That's one of the questions that I'd love to throw out for you, as well as for the public to address, as well as whether or not that statement that we are doing this to increase the amount of persons that are attracted to politics, if that has no foundation on which to stand.
I have no doubt that the fact that you would be paid a lot more in the political environment would have appealed to some people. But we're all talking about numbers and relativity, you know. And I don't think that that would necessarily by itself be an attractive impetus for people to join in the public sector or to become politicians, you know. It must attract some people. I believe it would obviously be an incentive for people to think in terms of politics as being a career or a life experience. But I don't think it would necessarily drive a whole set of people to go in that direction. So maybe to set that as an objective or as a rationale, I don't think it's necessarily a practical approach. But so 11% believe stiffer penalties for corruption. All right. And maybe I should just interject right here now that one of the things that came out of this study for the NIA was a view held by over 50% of the persons that we interviewed, that until you get the big fish, you really aren't dealing with corruption issues.
But is it that we know who the big fish are?
I can't
Our
say.
big fish is, I'm not even sure how to put it.
Yeah, I can't say, but it is again, we need to rely on the empirical data that we get. And over 50% of the people that we interviewed in this recent study said, unless you really tap in the big fish, you really are playing little games with corruption. That's what they're saying, all right? A very important fact to note, okay? But we got a whole heap of reasons, you know. Some of them are relatively small. 11%, as we said, stiffer penalties for corruption. 6% said investigate, punish public sector workers. Investigate, punish. But you have trials which are dragging out for years. And there's a certain degree of skepticism, which is another thing that is fueling people's engagement with corruption. There's a great degree of skepticism that, you know, the people who get caught can get off anyway. You know, and therefore, you know, why bother?
So could we make an assumption here that they're also suggesting that there's not enough faith in the systems that we have and the institutions that we have?
They are making that point. They are making that point. We looked at things like how they reacted to the justice system, for example, and there is a fair amount of skepticism that people will be prosecuted at all or in a relatively short space of time. And therefore, the people are a little, you know, why should I? Think about it, you know, is that people are generally, when you ask them about corruption and that type of thing, people frown on it. They frown on it. They say, well, you know, why should we? Notwithstanding, there's so many people who apparently are benefiting from corruption that people are turning a blind eye and are very skeptical about the processes involved in bringing people who are corrupt to book.
So it's endemic, one. We have an idea as to what some of the solutions are, but there's not enough will to address it because so many persons are actually benefiting from it.
Well, people are saying, and in one particular instance when we asked about a particular situation and, you know, how do you feel about this particular action? And people said, boy, I wish me could have get some of that too. They may frown upon corruption in principle, but when it talk in terms of how they could benefit, people are very, very, very much recognizing that they're probably swimming upstream in the challenge to do in challenging corruption issues. They're swimming very much upstream.
So in the same way then that we don't feel as though, well, they have implied from the study that there isn't enough hope in the institutions. Is it that there's a sense of hopelessness from an individual perspective, so there's no real impetus or will to actually go out and fight corruption?
I wouldn't go as far as saying we have identified any degree of hopelessness, but there is certainly skepticism that corruption issues are going to be dealt with in the way that they think it ought to be dealt with to correct the image of being a very corrupt country.
In real terms, though, what's the difference between not finding the will and, you said, the skepticism as opposed to hopelessness?
The will has to come from the policymakers and the persons who are executing, the various programs to deal with it. The buy-in has to come from the public. And with the data from the study does suggest that people are prepared to join the fight. But again, when we ask people, well, why aren't you more involved if you feel so strongly about corruption issues? Why aren't you more involved in trying to see if you can do something about it? There's a significant degree of fear of victimization.
So no one wants to start because they feel as, well, no one wants to become a martyr. And that's a fair, assessment to make.
So we have to really understand it. One, that there is the perception that corruption is rife. There is that perception. This is what the consumer, the general public says. They believe that corruption is a way of life. So even if I don't personally buy into it, the fact of the matter is that there is this kind of going along with the process, so to speak. Then the public, even when they are concerned about the level of corruption, don't feel that they should be engaged in the whole process of trying to help the drift, because they are fearful of what might happen to them. There's fear of victimization. So it's a mixed up kind of situation,
So in terms of percentage, though, I remember having this same discussion with someone else, and the statement was made that corruption is responsible for roughly anywhere between 5 and 7% of our domestic product. Would that be a fair assessment?
I don't have the data to comment sensibly on it. But if it's anywhere near there, then it's a major challenge.
Well, I mean, 6%, call it 6% of any country's GDP is a significant amount to consider. So if that is something that can be used, that number can be given so freely, then it must be something that has caught the attention, or it ought to be something that catches the attention of, one, the voting population, and two, those who are in office. Now, the question is, how can we, outside of being fearful of victimization, how can we bring those people to task? How can we encourage them to actually pay attention to this? I'm not sure if the data would have suggested anything.
Not really. The public has indicated certain things that they would do. They would be prepared to, if they felt more comfortable, write letters, join protests, call radio stations, etc., and call media houses. They would be prepared to do that. Whether or not they think that would have a fair degree of success, I don't have the data to substantiate or to comment on. But I think that there is a willingness amongst the general public to be participants in the drive against corruption. There's a willingness, all right? But there's at the same time a counteracting kind of concern that it may not mean anything, or more personally, that they could be victimized if they do come forward. And therefore, there is this challenge that whilst they may not necessarily buy into this whole process of corruption or be part of it, they are concerned that it may not go anywhere, or if they do, they could be victimized.
So it's a fair assessment then, and this echoes the same sentiments that persons from the advocacy network and others have been saying, that corruption is an extremely complex issue to address. And because of that, that might have been one of the reasons why, one, it's not being dealt with yet, and two, it's not being dealt with in the manner that it ought to be dealt with. I'm not asking if your survey would have made that suggestion, but what do you think? You think that it's sufficiently complex to cause those inhibitions or prohibitions in terms of handling it properly?
Well, one of the theories is that a lot of people benefit from corruption and therefore are not willing to do anything about it. All right? But we do have from the data which says that there's a small, relatively small body of persons who are prepared to come forward, and if they witness something that is corrupt as well, they're prepared to talk about it. But I can't escape by saying, I can't end by without saying that with all of that, there's a reservation about where it will go to, and if I will, in fact, be identified. There is that reservation. So therein lies one of the challenges, and therefore people simply embrace it. Embrace it, not necessarily being a part of it, but saying, it's a way of life. So what are we going to do?
So we're all stuck in limbo because we're all afraid to become martyrs.
It's a huge challenge, and nobody should attempt to downplay the significance of this whole monster that faces us. It's a huge challenge, and but I think it's something that if we're serious about lifting ourselves out of that 50 and lower category, that we have to address and address frontally. There's no question about it.
Last question though, where would be the sweet spot for us on that list in terms of ranking, and in terms of a number above 50, where would be a good place to be?
Well, first of all, we need to take a good look at and take seriously the Transparency International data, which says that for years we have been perceived to be amongst the more corrupt countries in the world. Now, what you really want to do, first of all, is drive towards lifting yourself out of that 50 and lower category, or 50 and worse category, all right? Lift yourself out of that. And I think we should set ourselves a target, say, over a period of time. It calls for action. It doesn't call for talk, it calls for action, all right? To lift yourself out of that category, and maybe your initial target should be getting up into the 60s as a first thrust, and then up into the 70s. And I think when we get up into that level, I think we could begin to see ourselves being differently perceived, and you will have I believe, a stronger buy-in from the general public as to what could we do to actually help. But it is a huge target, given the fact that we have moved out of the 40s, and we were in the 30s at one stage, by the way, right? To get yourself out of the 40s, that must be your initial objective, and the policymakers will need to take a good look. I am not competent to say, well, what are the things that would get you out of that? Clearly, you know, we're talking in terms of some of the solutions that people put forward. We have to take those on advisement, and don't scoff at it because it's the public and public doesn't know. You need to look at what the general public is saying in terms of what are the things that could be done to address this perception of very, very strong corruption in the country. And I believe set yourself goals, short-term goals and long-term goals, to get yourself closer to the 100 rather than in the 40s and lower.
All right. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you for having a very robust discussion on crime and corruption and local government, well, generally election speaking. So we hope to have you here at some other point in time. It's definitely something that we look forward to. And thank you for staying with us. We have been looking at a number of things that affect all of us as Jamaican people. I want to thank you. This has been The Conversation. I am Kwame Thomas. Do have a good one.